Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this morning's study. And we're going to continue looking at 1 Samuel chapter 17, finishing off the story of David and Goliath. Hopefully, we'll see what we get done today. But before we do, let's have a word of prayer. Dear gracious Heavenly Father, we invite your presence here as we open your word together. We ask that your Holy Spirit can instruct us and guide us, that you can enlighten our minds, that you can give us wisdom and understanding, and that the things that we see in your word will affect a change in our lives, that we can be drawn closer to you, and that we can reflect your character to those around us. We ask, Lord, that we can see the things that you want us to see, and that they will be helpful to each one of us. We pray for your angels' care and protection for each person as well, and that you can continue to work in our lives. And we pray this and ask it in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, so looking at 1 Samuel chapter 17, we were addressing, I'm just looking at we were addressing here David's weaponry yesterday. So his sling and his stones. Does anybody remember what we learned about that? What did we learn about the stones?
Well, we know that they're smooth.
Okay, and what did that give us? And we dealt with the sling and the stone. So what did we learn from that? Anybody remember?
Was there any mention of the stones being propelled through the air easier because of the smoothness?
No.
Okay.
We're just talking about symbolism here.
Fair enough. Okay.
Yeah, the smooth stones being Hebrew 25:12, that's taken from Hebrew 25:05.
Yeah, so we have the 525 in there, right?
Yep.
Yeah, so what we're doing is we're connecting this to July 18, 2020. So we know there's 525 days from July 18, 2020 to the end of the 777 structure, right? So the weapons of David's warfare are related to July 18th. So we're saying that David represents July 18th, 2020, and Goliath represents November 9th, 2019. So Parminder's champion, the Philistines, against Saul's armor bearer, David, right? Okay,
right.
So that's what we see here in this story with David against Goliath. It has to do with the battle in this movement between two different methodologies, two different ways of approaching prophecy.
So is this a test upon Israel?
With David? Like you're talking about with David fighting against Goliath? Well, it is a test.
You were just making the application with July 18th, 187.
Yeah.
So was this a test upon Israel?
Who's Israel?
Was this a test upon FFA?
Okay, yes. Yeah. Of the members, the people who are studying prophecy.
Okay.
Right. Yeah. So there's this test. Now we always said that July 18th was not a test in the way that people were trying to make it a test. That is, I didn't think that people had to accept July 18th as some kind of test. Nobody was being tested whether they accepted it or not. And the reason I said that, and the reason I still believe that, is it was something that was going to test us. But people didn't lose salvation because they were against time setting.
Okay.
That's the way that I looked at it. I didn't think that it was meant to be a test for people. It was a test for the people who accepted it, but not for the test for the people that didn't accept it, if that makes sense.
Then how do you divide who it's a test for and who it's not a test for?
Well, I don't need to divide it at all. God's the one who decides that, because the people who ended up being tested were the ones that accepted July 18th, right? That is, people made a profession they believed in July 18th. It's when the prediction fails that they're tested.
All right.
right? So it is a test after July 18th for those who had professed to believe in July 18th. Once they stop believing in it because the prediction fails, then they're going into darkness, right? But whether somebody accepted it beforehand or not, that's a whole different story, because not everybody was exposed to enough information to be tested by it, right? I think people were justified in saying, well, we shouldn't set time. People who were, it depends. I mean, obviously, I don't know anybody's heart, and it's not really about, like, I don't think the whole purpose of July 18th was as a test for the world or a test for the church or anything like that. It was just something that we were being tested on. It was all internal, I guess, is my argument, that it had to do with this movement, not with anything outside of this movement. Now, you could say, well, November 9th and July 18th were sort of a test to certain people, obviously, but it still was going to be within the movement, right? That was my point. Like, some people believe that, we needed to give this message of July 18th to the Levites, and, the church needs to accept it and all that kind of stuff. But I never actually took that position, because I felt that it was the symbols were too special to this movement to be of any significance to people outside of the movement.
Really?
Well, yeah. Well, it depends on what area you're talking about. Now, I do think that what we learned in the area of chronology is what we're supposed to be presenting to the church. That is, the church needs to understand how to study prophecy. And I think that at some point will be presented or be seen. But all the stuff that I was doing, like, that's so esoteric. Like, unless you're really, like, we've spent a lot of time studying the calendars and all that, so you guys have a pretty good understanding of it. But for the average person, even the average Adventist, that's a lot of information to expect that somebody has to accept. So just like in Millerite history, the second angel's message, who was that for?
Wasn't it more for the Protestants?
The second angel's message?
Yeah.
No, the first angel's message is for the Protestants.
All right.
Right? Because they failed, they failed that test. So the second angel's message is just for Millerites. And you could see that when Samuel Snow presented at Exeter, right, there was already a groundwork laid for the Millerites to understand it. One is he had presented it at Boston. It had been published. They were studying, and the story, the way that it sort of has come to us, is after Exeter, as people are leaving the camp meeting, they're going over the presentations that Samuel Snow had presented. Some people remember one part, some people another. But there was this understanding, like, people understood the message, right?
Okay.
They have the basis to have faith in it, to understand it. That, the prophetic periods ended on October 22nd, 1844. They could see that. There's no way that what I was doing with Ezekiel and all that the average Adventist could understand that. But people within the movement had already understood the symbolic use of dates, right? Like, everything came from the stuff that we had been studying. So those people, in a sense, are going to be tested. But they weren't tested in the way that they expected they were going to be tested, because they thought if they accepted July 18, then that was what made them, on the right side of the issue. But they have to accept it after July 18 fails. That is, these are all in a line of failed predictions, right? July 18th, November 9th, the Mayan date, September 23rd, 2017. Like, these are all failed predictions. And that was really the whole point, is that we would understand what it was that God was trying to teach us. Does that make sense at all, Dwight?
Well, okay. There's an underlying reason why I'm asking questions the way I am.
Okay.
Now, while we would look at this especially with the way that we've been studying. And by the way, there are a couple of interesting comments in the chat, but in this situation, we have a test that is being brought upon Israel.
Yeah.
And as you're pointing out, it's a test for some, and it's not a test for others.
Well, it's a test for FFA,
Okay.
right? Yeah. So Israel here in this context represents FFA. Saul represents the leadership of FFA.
Correct.
Yeah.
Now, I know this might seem strange, but have you had access to see that last drawing that Stephen presented on WhatsApp?
Yeah. You're talking but with the 126 shekels, the fall of Babylon, basically.
Correct.
Yeah.
Now, as a question, was this a test for Israel, and was this a judgment upon Babylon?
The fall of Babylon?
Yeah.
It's definitely a judgment upon Babylon. To say it's a test, it's the end of the prophetic period. It's the time of the end, right? The 70 years for Babylon. So they're going to have a test when they're called to leave Babylon and go to Jerusalem, right? So that's going to be progressive under Cyrus's decree, Darius's decree, and then Artaxerxes' decree.
Okay. Now I'm asking the question based in our study for a reason. We look at this to the left side. We have the fall of Babylon, Mene, Mene, Tekel, Upharsin, the 126 shekels, or the 1/20th of the 7 times. And as Stephen is pointing out, this looks to occur on the 13th of October of 539 BC on the Julian calendar, right?
Yep. Yeah, it's the 16th day of the 7th month on the Babylonian calendar.
16th day of the 7th month on the biblical calendar.
Babylonian.
Okay.
Because, we have the Babylonian account. They're going to be the same.
Okay.
But I'm just saying that the 16th day of the 7th month in the document, part of the Babylonian Chronicles, the Nabonidus Chronicle, it gives the 16th day of the 7th month is when Babylon falls, which is October 13th, 539 BC.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, when I was looking at this, and I sent an email to Stephen to ask questions. So I'm gonna throw these questions out here right now. If we look at this and we accept this, and I do accept what he's done here because it's very good. On the rabbinic calendar, that's the 18th day of the 7th month.
Which is
13th of October, 539 BC is the 18th day of the 7th month on the rabbinic calendar.
Oh, on the rabbinic. Okay, yeah. Because the rabbinic calendar drifts over time. But yeah, you got the 18:7 there. Yeah.
You get the 187 as occurring here.
Yeah.
So we have the symbol of judgment, but we also have the symbol of a test, right?
Yeah.
Now, the other part of it that I found interesting, when we apply this on the Gregorian calendar, this occurs on the 7th day of the 10th month, which is just a reversal of the 10th day of the 7th month, or the Day of Atonement.
Yeah. Yeah, and just a bit of a clarification about this date. So now when we say Babylon falls on the 13th of October,
yeah,
it's going to be at midnight, right?
Right, exactly.
Okay. So technically it's from the 12th to the 13th. Okay. Just a clarification. So the date that the Babylonians give would actually be October 12th. Okay.
All right.
The 16th day of the 7th month on the Babylonian calendar is October 12th, but they're counting not because this whole thing occurs over a period of time, right? So they're not talking about what happens in the night. They're in a sense talking about what we would call the day before. right? When they give the date. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, so it is a little bit tricky, like to try to figure out the date. So if you look it up, like on the internet, they'll say it's the 12th of October. But I say it's the 13th because I count the fact that we're actually looking at when the writing happens on the wall is midnight.
Right.
Like it's moved to the next day, right? On our calendar. So yeah. So anyway, that's how I look at the situation. It's a little bit confusing for people sometimes dealing with these ancient calendars and how they line up with ours. But if we do that, so we got, so when we look at the biblical calendar, we can look at the 16th of Tishri is October 13th.
Right.
And then on our calendar, but that would be the 17th of Tishritu on the Babylonian. And then, of course, the rabbinic gives the 18th of Tishri instead of the 16th of Tishri. It's October 13th on the Julian, and then October 7th on the Gregorian.
Right.
Okay, so you get the 10th day of the 7th month, that symbol, plus the 13th day of October, which of course is connected to our history as well as other events. So we got all these symbolic dates tied together in that. Now you're saying, now of course this is the time of the end, right?
Correct.
That's being marked because it's the time of the end of the 70 years for Babylon. That is when in Ezra it talks about, and in Jeremiah 25:11 about Cyrus, right? So Babylon has 70 years, and then this judgment comes upon them, they're going to fall. But there's still 2 more years for the Israelites in Babylon, right? They don't get called out of Babylon until after Cyrus becomes the king of Babylon, after the death of Darius the Mede, right? So Darius is still going to be king for 2 more years after Babylon falls. He's going to be king of Persia. When he dies, then Cyrus becomes king, and then Cyrus 6 months later issues his decree. So the time of the end has these 2 different kings, the kings of the Medes and the kings of the Persians. So just to be clear. Okay, so go on.
So here we are dealing with a date that we're addressing regarding the fall of Babylon. We're also dealing with a symbol, the 187, of a test that we have been looking at, that was a test for FFA, that is a test here for the Israelites, because are they going to return when they've been told to return?
Yeah. Now some will and some won't. Now we got 2 years, 5 months, and 20 days representing the 2520 to Daniel beginning his fast. And then there's 21 days, 7 plus 7 plus 7 days, 3 weeks, 3 full weeks to when Cyrus's decree is issued.
Correct.
Right. So on the 24th day of the first month, or April 23rd, 536 BC. So Stephen's chosen to count the days from when the fast begins, and then 7 plus 7 plus 7 days. And from then he's got this count, 777 days inclusive from, so he's added 126 to 777 days to get that 2 years, 5 months, and 20 days, right?
Right.
And then the 25th day of the 11th month gives us that division. And the 25th day of the 11th month refers back to Jeremiah 25:11. So when you take the number of days, you're going to have 126 plus 777 days.
903.
903. And if you add that to the 21 days, you get 924, which can also represent the 26th day of the 4th month, just if you flip over the 9. But I don't know anything else about 924, but that would be the number of days to the end, to April 23rd, 536. Anyway, so I see the 26th day of the 4th month as a symbol there.
In all of this,
Yeah.
we're showing the way that Stephen's approached this. We have the 126 shekels. We have the 7 times. We have the end of the 70 years for Babylon. And then in a couple of different ways, we have the 777 of Lamech's age, which we have applied several different ways within how things are progressing in and through the movement.
Yeah.
So it was interesting to me that this application could then be made where at the fall of Babylon, wine is being used. And in this case, the wine is that of, I would have to say, false doctrine. And then we come down to Daniel's fast and there's no wine being used. So how else would we apply that?
Well, wine usually represents doctrine.
You know, I've always been intrigued by this one, and the way that Stephen's presented it even intrigues me further, because at this point, of course, the feasts that normally would occur in the first month, because they were in captivity, the children of Israel would not have been partaking of those feasts. They would not have partaken of the Passover. But Daniel is making the notation in his book that no wine, no pleasant bread came to my mouth.
In that period of that fast. So
Correct.
Now, also it's going to be April 2nd, which is the 27th day of March as well.
So we have 273.
Yeah. So the symbol to the message to the Levites.
So this little chart is extremely pregnant with symbolism that relate directly to the movement and directly to what we're studying right now with Saul and David.
Yeah. Yeah. And then you're going to have, so you got from October 13th, 539, 126 days to February 16th,
right?
Which also relates to Samuel Snow's letters, right? His first letter. And that's the 25th day of the 11th month on the biblical calendar. So that relates to Jeremiah 25:11. Then you have an inclusive count to April 2nd, 536, when the fast begins on the 3rd day of the first month on the biblical calendar. And then 21 days. So it actually is 923 days or 924 inclusive count to the end of the fast. That's when the decree is issued. And then they're going to return to Jerusalem. And on the first day of the 7th month, they're going to build an altar, which is 1,077 days after the fall of Babylon. It's also 154 days from the end of the fast, of Daniel's fast. So the 154 is 77 times 2, which we see in Samuel Snow's letters as an inclusive count from February 16th to his last letter published July 18th, 1844. So we have all of these different symbols. They tie us to pretty much almost all the major symbols. I don't 391 and a half or anything, but otherwise, pretty much every other symbol that I can think of, primary symbols we have.
Exactly.
Yeah. So that's not very likely to have occurred by chance.
I would have to think that was highly unlikely for it to be by chance.
Yeah. So we got the 2520, we got the 126, we got October 13th, related to our history and time setting. Midnight Cry. Well, I guess the October 13th does give us the 391 and a half, because that's where we count the 391 and a half to November 9th.
Okay, so then pretty much all of these major symbols.
Every major symbol, is in this chart, ending the fall of Babylon and the captivity of Israel under Cyrus's decree. You can even say the 3rd day of the first month is the midst of the week symbol.
Right.
Right. Yeah. So lots of symbols here in this little chart. Okay.
So how this returns then, we have a test, a judgment. So there's a test for some, not a test for others, but we also have a judgment being placed, especially a judgment upon this situation with the Philistines, right? He's challenged, Goliath has decided to challenge the supremacy of God, and David stands up to refute the power of the Philistine.
So as far as the tests are concerned, like can you sum that up?
The big test here, Israel had been following Saul. Israel wanted a king like the nations around them.
Okay, and which is what this movement wanted, right? We wanted an
Yes.
organized.
So Israel began to understand the fallacy of their decision, because now they have a king, and the king is malleable. He has a character that's mercurial. It's changeable.
Yeah.
So Saul has no faith in his armor bearer, yet his armor bearer has total faith in God. Goliath's armor bearer comes out before him. Saul's armor bearer comes out, but it is Saul's armor bearer and his faith that is then exhibited on the field of battle. So the nation of Israel now sees the mistake that they've made.
Yeah. So what does David have to do exactly, though? Because David representing July 18th. So Saul has David's been anointed, January 16th, 2001. So July 18th continues to be a test for the movement.
Correct.
And we see that with what happened in the unfolding of the events in Nashville on December 25th, 2020, the end of the insurrection, the end and the connection between the 100 days fast and the 10-day fast. We'll put it there, days of prayer, but I'm going to use the word fast. Days of prayer, right? And then that structure of the chiasm, the 434 and the 343 on January 16th. We got that the wave offering symbol, right? All of these different things come together, and the movement is having to make a decision. And David still stands as the truth, right? That is the correct way of addressing prophecy and the correct way of addressing the Philistines, right? So this would indicate, that what we have done in the decisions that we've made regarding July 18th afterwards, like not recanting and definitely not taking the position that Jeff has taken, that Saul has taken, where, it makes no sense. And it is that kind of, well, we could say that Jeff is presently, we'll use the word mercurial, right? He's changeable, right? He's not the Jeff that we knew before. Now, when it comes to FFA, like there comes a certain point where FFA is represented by Saul, right? Is it when they want to organize? Like where would we mark this? Is it just the dealing with time setting? When Jeff begins time setting?
Would you line it up with 1863?
No, because we're dealing with our history. I mean, you could take this and apply it to the Adventist Church, but we're not, because all of the symbols tied to our history. So you'd have to explain how you would put it with 1863, unless you're going to put a parallel between our movement and 1863 in that sense. But we still. Yeah.
Making it where they was wanting Jeff to be the king, and in 1863 they wanted to have any church wanting to be have a king over them.
Yeah, well, maybe you could take 1863 and line it up with what Jeff's doing now, but not not back then, not at the start of FFA. Because the history that we're in is the history of 1850, right? That's where we've placed our time, right? With the making of the 1850 chart, not the making of the 1863 chart. Does that make sense, William? Okay, well, you're silent, so I don't know. Okay, so however we understand this, to me, there's going to be this inquiry.
I'm sorry to put it off. Yeah, it makes sense.
Okay. Angela makes a reference to Samson that probably could be applied maybe, but I don't know. Because I look at Samson representing Christ, so I'm not really sure. He's an ironic representation of Christ. Okay, so we had this inquiry now. So this is where we were finishing off yesterday. So Saul knows who David is, right? But now he's going to make an inquiry at the time that David is going down to fight Goliath. Correct? Because this part here says, and when Saul saw David go forth against the Philistine, he said unto Abner, the captain of the host, Abner, whose son is this youth? And Abner said, as thy soul liveth, O king, I cannot tell. And the king said, inquire thou whose son the stripling is. And David returned from the slaughter of the Philistine. Abner took him and brought him before Saul with the head of the Philistine in his hand. And Saul said to him, whose son art thou, thou young man? And David answered, I am the son of thy servant Jesse the Bethlehemite. That's the end of the chapter. So what is this inquiry at the end? So Saul knows who David is, right? Or at least he should.
Well, if he's appointed him his armor bearer, he should at least have a somewhat of a knowledge of who David is. Yes.
So the question is, why is there this inquiry? Now, some commentators say it's because it's like, well, who is he really? Like, what is his genealogy? What is his position? The question is, we know that Saul's going to be jealous, but that jealousy appears to come when, Saul has slain his thousands and David his 10,000s. But if we're looking at this, the way that I looked at this is when we have this July 18th prediction, that the question is, who is, like, how do we account for this in context of November 9th? So we have November 9th. We haven't decided who Abner represents. So I'm not sure, but I think it has something to do with July 18th in asking in that question, something to do with how FFA is going to deal with July 18th. So exactly where this is, in history, in our movement, I'm not 100% certain, but it has something to do with that. Now, Jesse is going to have this simple answer. I'm the son of thy servant Jesse, the Bethlehemite. Now, we know the Bethlehemite, that the number is 1022, right? That's October 22nd as a symbol. And we already know that October 22nd lines up with July 18th as a symbol, right? 187th day of the year, it's the 10th day of the 7th month in 1844, that's October 22nd. And when July 18th failed, we recognized that was a parallel to October 22nd, that we had the right date, but the wrong event.
Right.
Okay, so that's what we understand about David being this July 18th. Okay.
Agreed.
Any more thoughts on that?
Well, there's with all of this that's going on, as you were pointing out, we come to this portion in chapter 17 where David has stood up to Goliath, which Saul refused to do, which none of the armies of Israel wanted to do. So in 1754, David takes the head of the Philistine. He brings it to Jerusalem, but he put his armor in his tent. Now, nowhere else in this chapter are we seeing a reference to David pitching a tent at the point of battle. So what tent did he put it in?
I don't know.
Then,
Well, I mean, okay, go on.
then as soon as this section is complete, now you have another section that begins that said, and when Saul saw David go forth against the Philistine, he said unto Abner, the captain of the host, Abner, whose son is this youth? And Abner said, as thy soul liveth, O king, I cannot tell. We know that Abner is Saul's uncle, right?
Yeah.
So David is not known within Saul's family.
Okay.
Saul is feigning, or at least seems to feign, his ignorance of who David is.
That's what you think he's doing?
Well, how can you appoint someone as an armor bearer and not have a clue as to who they are?
Yeah, I don't see how he could be feigning either. That doesn't really make any sense to me.
All right. So then Saul says, inquire, you, Abner, inquire whose son the stripling is. So why is David being referred to as a stripling?
Well, so when we looked at stripling, something kept out of sight.
Right.
So that the way that I understand this question is why is this person been kept from us? Like what's hidden here? Like he recognizes there's something that needs to be seen that's hidden. That's the way that I understand it.
All right.
So yeah, I have a little bit different. So I just don't think that he's feigning. It doesn't really make sense to me, but it is kind of a puzzle.
Well, especially when we're going to compare this verse with 1 Samuel 16:21 and 16:22.
Well, David came to Saul, stood before him, and he loved him greatly and became his armor bearer, right? So that's going to be before, right? And it came to pass when the evil spirit from God was upon Saul that David took an harp and played with his hands, so Saul was refreshed and was well, and the evil spirit departed from him. So now David's a lot younger there in chapter 16, right? So this is a few years before.
This is why, as I'm looking at this, if this is a few years before, are we trying to say at this point that David is 10 years old?
Yeah, or 13 maybe or something. It's a few years. We don't know exactly, but he's a lot younger, right? This isn't like the year before, a year later type of thing.
Well, the reason I'm asking the question, where we are assuming at this point that David is 15 when he comes up against Goliath.
Yeah. So he's a child when he's anointed.
Okay.
Yeah. He's not a teenager. But yeah, we don't know for certain, right? These are just conjectures based on the information that we have. Given in Scripture and the Spirit prophecy. So, yeah, it's not really certain what's happening here. So but some commentators they have this idea that this inquiry is more about his social standing, right? Not so much exactly like it's almost as if Saul is like, well, who is this person that I have to contend with, right? Like, is this a threat to my kingship, right? Is the idea that some people have, that Saul is saying, okay, here is this person who defeated Goliath. Do I need to really worry about him? Does that make sense? I mean, that's how commentators sort of take the question.
Well,
but he would know who he is on some level, but not know who he is on some other level. And that's more what he's inquiring about. But he must have known who he was. In the simple answer that David gives, I don't think it would give any information more than what he already had.
So David when he is introduced initially with Saul, becomes his armor bearer. David is not with the army at the time that they come into an array against the Philistines.
Mhm.
He comes 40 days into the array. He brings gifts to his brothers, gifts to their leaders, and then begins to stand up for the honor of God. So yeah, there's still a lot we have to look at and try to figure out.
Mhm. Yeah. So he asked this question when David is going down to the battle,
Right.
and then Abner's going to take him and bring him before Saul
Right.
with the head of the Philistine in his hand. So Goliath's head is in his hand. Of course, we know head has all the digits of July 18, 2020. That's 7218, Rosh. But it's a common word, right? And then hand is 3027. That's March 27th. So the question is, when is this in our line that this battle goes on? And I say it's earlier on, right? This is, if there was some way that I could connect this to some specific date, I just don't know what date I could attach it to. Now, Jesse the Bethlehemite, if you add those together, you get 5180. So you got the symbol of August 15th, the midnight cry.
That's pretty interesting.
Yeah. Okay. So if I add together the son of Jesse the Bethlehemite, so that is the 1121 plus 3448 plus 1022, I get 6301. So if I put that in the Mayan calendar, that's going to give me like 130631. That's going to give me January 20th, 2019. So that's one day before Heidi and I are kicked out of the School of the Prophets. So if we put that inquiry there, I don't know if that makes sense or not, but it gives us basically the center of that chiastic structure just one day before, right? Does that make sense? Any thoughts on
Adding
that?
more and more to what we're talking about.
Yeah, because definitely that's dealing with that history that we've already addressed. Now that's going to be like, and that's going to be 6,340 days past September 11th. So because January 21st, 2019 is 6,341 days. So there's 40 days difference between those. Now, if I go to, if I just count from September 11th, 2001, 6,301 days, right? So I'm taking that number in two different ways. But that's going to give me, it's going to give me, why is it not working? It's not going where it won't. Well, I know why. Typing in the wrong keyboard. There we go. So it's going to bring me to December 12th, 2018. So that's 40 days before we get kicked out of the School of the Prophets. Now that day is, I'm pretty sure I know what that happened that day. Like I'm 99% sure. So Heidi and I get, well, this is kind of a long story of what happened, but basically we're there to help Brian, right? So it took a few months to get Brian's place ready. Brian moves in. Heidi and I move in with Brian. But Brian, his lifestyle and our lifestyle do not fit at all. We're more annoyance to him than a help. So we decided to try to find somewhere else to stay. And I'm pretty sure it was on the Wednesday on December 12th. We get put into, they force us to stay in one of those, the dorm rooms. Heidi and I in the dorm room with the double bunk bed there, with the bunk bed. Does that make sense to people? Right?
Yeah.
So, and Heidi's claustrophobic, and but they make us stay there. Now, I'm pretty sure it's on that Wednesday before my dad dies. So my dad's gonna die. Let me see. Well, it's a while before my dad dies, but I'm pretty sure it was the Wednesday, and my dad dies December 20th, so about 8 days later, because we were staying in that room at that time. So I kind of think that's connected. I don't know. It seems kind of strange, but it's 40. It gives us this period of 40 days. So from the time we're sort of forced to stay in that dorm, and like the first night we stayed there, Heidi was just freaking out. So we stayed awake. We actually went into the School of the Prophets in that waiting room there at the front, whatever, the foyer, and just sat on the couch and it took Heidi a few days to get there. Now, William Miller dies the 20th of December as well. Okay. Different year than my dad, but same date. Okay. So anyway, we got that. That's kind of what I think happened. So I don't know, with us being sort of treated that way, how we would fit this in with this line, though that it is part of this inquiry into July 18th, right? So yeah, there's a bunch of stuff that happened, but I'm pretty sure that's kind of the scenario. But yeah, I can't be 100% certain that that's the date, but I'm pretty sure it was the Wednesday before my dad died that we were put into the dorm. I don't think it was the Wednesday before that. Anyways, this is kind of making sense that it is something to do with, so who would Abner be then? And what is he doing? Like, because I don't know if I still fully understand this story, but because it just seems kind of odd, this whole little bit about Saul inquiring after whose son he is, whose son David is. Yeah, I'll read what this commentator says. This is Keel and Delitzsch commentary. So it has a comment on 1 Samuel 17, verse 55 and 56. They have a heading, Jonathan's friendship. Now, I'm not really sure why they put that here, because Jonathan's not mentioned at all, but that's what they say. The account of the relation into which David was brought to Saul through the defeat of Goliath is introduced by a supplementary remark in 1 Samuel 17:55 to 56, as to the conversation which took place between Saul and his commander-in-chief Abner concerning David, whilst he was fighting with the giant. So far, therefore, as the actual meaning is concerned, the verbs in 1 Samuel 17:55 and 1 Samuel 17:56 should be rendered as pluperfects. Do you know what a pluperfect is?
No.
So it has to do with the fact that these are comments in, like, that this is something that happens earlier. So pluperfect is a perfect past tense, the past perfect tense. So a completed past tense. So that means that this is written in a way that it's not something that's continuing to happen after, it's a reference back to something that was said earlier. Right? That's why he's saying it's referring back to something that happened, even though this event had already occurred. That's what he's saying. When Saul saw the youth walk boldly up to meet the Philistine, he asked Abner whose son he was, whereupon Abner assured him with an oath that he did not know. In our remarks concerning the integrity of this section, we have already observed with regard to the meaning of the question put by Saul that it does not presuppose an actual want of acquaintance with the person of David and the name of his father, but only ignorance of the social condition of David's family, with which both Abner and Saul may hitherto have failed to make themselves more fully acquainted. Yeah, so they say the common solutions of this apparent discrepancy, such as that Saul pretended not to know David, or that his question is to be explained on the supposition that his disease affected his memory, have but little probability in them, although Karkar still adheres to them, some commentator. So he takes the position, or they do, Keel and Delitzsch, these commentators, I mean, they believe in the integrity of the story, but they don't accept the idea that Saul is pretending not to know David. So that's their position, right? Whether it's correct or not. But I think it is kind of more a reasonable thing is that Saul is concerned about who this David is. That would be, I think, more what's underneath his question. Like, who is this person? Is this some threat to my throne? Because Saul knows that somebody's being chosen instead of him, right?
Well, yeah, I'm trying to get this placed in my head, right? Didn't David come and play music for Saul because of his bad, the evil spirit that was on Saul?
Yeah, chapter 16. And he's also his armor bearer.
Right. So is that when he makes him his armor bearer?
Yeah, earlier. Yeah. Now that's probably some kind of more what that exactly means. I think it could be almost like an honorary position because he's just a child, right?
Right.
So what exactly an armor bearer does is not quite clear. Yeah. Okay.
So that would mean Saul would have to know who David was.
Oh yeah.
Right.
Yeah, it's clear he knows who David is.
Okay. Well,
Right.
I've been trying to get it straight in my head. All right.
Yeah. So the people say, well, this is kind of odd. Why is he asking who David is if he already knows? So some people take the position. Dwight took that position. Whether he still sticks with it or not, I don't know. But take the position that Saul is feigning not to know David. But I don't know how, if he's played before Saul. I mean, other people would know that Saul knows who David is. And Abner would probably know that Saul knows who David is. He must know something. But so this question must have some deeper meaning under it, as far as we know that Saul knows that God has chosen someone else, right? To be king. Right. That's what Samuel told him. So Saul is got his eye out for who this might be. And the fact that David has just killed Goliath, Saul is kind of like, who is this person really? Like, we need to look into this more because this might be a threat to my throne. That's the way that I would take it. Does that seem reasonable?
Yeah, that seems reasonable.
Okay. So any more questions about this chapter, this section? We have some references here. Signs of the Times, 4th of March, 1886, Review and Herald, 23rd of March, 1886. I don't know what Aust Youth is.
Australian Youth.
Oh, Australian Youth. Okay. March 1st, 1888, paragraph 7. And Signs of the Times, the 3rd and the 10th of August, 1888. So these articles, you have them listed here. What are they covering? Do you know? Do you remember?
They are very specific references to giving other details that are not covered within chapter 17.
Okay, so maybe what I'll do is, so I just wonder if Ellen White has any reference to this section in 1 Samuel. She doesn't reference this section at all in any of her writings about this inquiry.
Well, there's a passing reference, but the date is so strange, I don't know that we could make anything of it.
What do you mean?
Signs of the Times, August 17 of 1888.
Okay.
So you have the digits of 187 occurring in 1888 prior to the 1888 General Conference session.
Yeah. Okay. So what's in here?
Well, the title of the article is The Character and Effects of Envy.
Right. So it says, after the slaying of Goliath, David was brought before King Saul, and the king inquired concerning his parentage and life. Okay, so she does reference this. And it came to pass when he had made an end of speaking unto Saul that the soul of Jonathan was knit with the soul of David. And Jonathan loved him as his own soul. So that's going to be the next chapter, 18 verse 1.
Right.
So that's probably why he talks about this. So we haven't looked at that yet. Now we're going to see Saul's jealousy as well, because David's going to get the praise of these people, right? The Israelites. Okay, so
When the women began singing, Saul has slain his thousands and David his 10,000s.
yeah,
From what we're addressing as far as the age of David and what that could mean for the age of Saul, that would mean that a 55-year-old adult was jealous of a 15-year-old.
yeah. So Saul kept David with him and would not permit him to return to his father's house. Jonathan and David made a covenant to be united as brethren, and the king's son stripped himself of the robe that was upon him and gave it to David and his garments, even to his sword and to his bow and to his girdle. David was entrusted with important responsibilities, yet he preserved his modesty, and everyone loved him. But there was no one so dear to him as Jonathan, because he possessed a pure and noble spirit. Okay, so we're going to look at some of these things, but that's the reference we have as far as. Yeah, I'm not sure why the Ellen White disc doesn't give us this reference to this verse that's quoted, because normally they give us. At least it's supposed to. Now we know that Jonathan represents, primarily me, just because of the name, gift of Jehovah and gift of God, Theodore being gift of God, and how we've studied it later in connection with the attack upon the Philistines. So David representing July 18th and Christ as the leader of the movement, that would make sense. And Jonathan taking off the robe that was upon him and giving it to David and his garments, even his sword. So the leadership of the movement is given over to Christ, not to some man. Right? That's how we've understood this. Now, have you worked on chapter 18 notes, Dwight?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Because that's what we'll look at on Sunday. Here, I should share the screen here, what I'm looking at on this. Yeah, so we got August 17th, which gives us the 187, right? 817. Right. So it gives us those. If we did in reverse, 718, which is all, or we could do 178. Like we could just organize those numbers in different ways. Okay, so there's the paragraph there, paragraph 1 from 1888, August 17th. Yeah, so she actually quotes the verses, but in the E.G. White disc, it doesn't give us this verse as something that Ellen White quotes. So I'm not sure why. But so this happens. So when Saul makes this inquiry, and then Abner brings David to Saul, that this is when Jonathan becomes connected to David. Okay. So how would we fit that in with our lines?
I think before we start looking to fit this portion in with our lines, it might be an idea to cover at least a couple of the other articles that she had written regarding chapter 17.
Okay.
Because that might give us a few more details so that we can make a more informed decision.
Yeah, okay. Well, yeah, I agree. Except we could still comment because we can't do that all in 6 minutes.
No.
So at least we can preliminarily take a look at it, at what we think this is referring to. So we're just saying that we'll go here. So we'll just start looking at this. And I'll go over the other articles before Sunday and see what there is that we've missed. But so it came to pass when he had made an end of speaking unto Saul, that the soul of Jonathan was knit. So we got this word knit, 7194. It can mean lots of different things. It can mean conspired, bind, bound, stronger. So often it's used in the sense of you can see as with conspiracies, which kind of is true in this. So they bind together. They have a league together. So it doesn't necessarily mean something negative. A compact, an agreement. So the word, it means to bind, to tie, bind together, league together, conspire. Yeah. So there's different verbal forms, as you can see there. The call form, the nifal, the pl, pual, the hithpal. That's where he would have, like the pl is to bind oneself, right? Hithpal would be to actually conspire. I would think this is probably in the call form based upon how it's written, that Jonathan was knit, so that would be was bound with the soul of David. And Jonathan loved him as his own soul. So love should be ahab. Okay, so we'd have to figure out when that is. So any final thoughts?
Not yet.
Yeah. And that word end, I mean, we've run into this word quite a bit, 3615, which can mean, can be related to the 391.5, as we've seen, kala. So we had looked at that as one of the other words, to end, whether intransitively or transitively, to complete. So to cease or to finish. So if David makes an end of speaking to Saul with the leadership of FFA, is that when FFA sort of rejects July 18th, like December 6th, 2020?
That could be a possibility.
Okay. Well, anyway, we'll come back to this on Sunday. Let's close with prayer. Dear Father in heaven, we are so grateful for all the things that you do and for the study this morning. We just ask that you can be with each person, that you can watch over them, take care of our family and loved ones, and that we can have an influence for good today. Bring us together again to study your word. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen.